Her true story from Iowa. They laughed at my old clothes during family photos, so I removed my name from their inheritance papers. They mocked my dress. I rewrote the legacy. It was the first Sunday of the new year, and the whole family had gathered in the church hall for our annual family photo. There was hot cider on the folding table and a silver helium banner that read, "New Year, New Blessings." I had taken the bus that morning wearing my olive green swing dress, modest, high-necked, with wide cuffs. I had sewn it myself over 2 decades ago, just in time for my son's high school graduation. I remember the way he held my hand that day, grinning as he said, "Mom, you're the most beautiful woman in the room." I had believed him. I wore that same dress now not because I could not afford another, but because it meant something. To me, maybe not to them. When I walked into the room, the buzz of conversation dipped for a moment. Then I heard it, sharp as a thorn. "Mom, look at Grandma," my granddaughter snorted through a burst of laughter. "She looks like some cocoon wiggling its way into something uglier." I stopped. My hand gripped the side of the chair I had just reached. The laugh that followed wasn't just hers. It was layered, cruel, complicit. "Right?" said my daughter-in-law, placing a manicured hand on the girl's shoulder. "She looks like an old cocoon that just never opened, like she's stuck in it." They both burst into stifled laughter, trying to act like they were joking, but they weren't hiding it from me, or anyone. I tried to ignore it. I adjusted my sleeves and took a seat on the edge of the couch, pretending to smooth the fabric with calm hands. Then I saw my grandson lift his phone. "Snap, Grandma's at it again," he said into the group chat that lit up on his screen. "Curtain Cosplay, Volume 3. I heard the ping of notifications across the room, and then my daughter-in-law sealed it with a sneer. "Honestly, someone shut the window if the curtain's going to start walking around. This is a family photo, not a haunted house tour." Laughter again, softer this time, but no less cutting. I looked to my son. He was sipping cider and scrolling his phone. He looked up briefly when he sensed the silence. His eyes met mine for less than a second, then dropped again. He said nothing. Nothing. Not even a polite chuckle to smooth it over. Not even a "Mom looks fine" to me. Just the cold, sharp silence of someone who had long since decided I was no longer useful. I sat there for another moment. The photographer cleared his throat, probably sensing the tension. "Okay, everyone, let's get ready. Grandparents in the middle." I stood up, not abruptly, not angrily. I stood with care, dignity, and something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. "I'll sit this one out," I said, my voice calm. Everyone turned. My daughter-in-law raised an eyebrow, then muttered something about drama queens. No one stopped me. Not even the kids, who once fought over sitting in my lap. Not even the son who once promised to build me a house next door when he got rich. I walked out of the frame. The laughter resumed behind me, as if I had never been part of them, as if I had always been a shadow they tolerated, not a woman who once worked 3 jobs to make sure they had shoes, books, birthday cakes. I stepped outside. The wind was sharp. It tugged at the hem of my dress, like a friend urging me to move faster. I walked slowly down the sidewalk, past the oak tree where we once took summer pictures, past the church's community board where they used to post my name for volunteer work, past the memories, all of them looking smaller now. I did not cry. I was not angry. I was awake. And when I got home, I opened the hallway closet. I took off the olive dress and hung it up with care. Then I walked to the study, unlocked the bottom drawer, and pulled out a thin folder. It contained my will, my property deeds, and a typed inventory of every asset I had accumulated over the past 60 years. I laid them out across the table. Then I made a pot of tea, sat down, and began to rewrite everything. Because if they could erase my dignity in a second, I could erase their entitlement just as fast. I remember it like it was yesterday. The proud ache in my chest when I first slipped into that olive green swing dress for my son's high school graduation. I had spent weeks stitching the pleats just right, adjusting the hem so it brushed the ground with quiet grace. My husband, Walter, pressed his hand to my shoulder and said, "Donna, you made that with love. He'll remember you today." And he was right. Daniel walked across that stage wearing his tuxedo, turned, and saw me in the crowd. He pointed and mouthed the words, "That's my mom." with the biggest grin you ever could imagine. I felt like I'd sewn dignity into every thread. After Walter passed, the house and property were in my name. I never intended to sell. I intended to pass it on. I believed in the promise of inheritance, not because wealth was precious, but because it symbolized continuity, family, legacy. I met with my lawyer many times. We spoke quietly about life insurance, about farmland leases, about future property tax. Each time I said, "All for Daniel," I meant it. I believed him. They all believed me. I added to my savings, not for myself, but so he wouldn't struggle. When my father was laid off before I was born, the mortgage followed him for 30 years. I promised I would break those cycles. So I worked extra shifts as a nurse and invested in a small portfolio. I minored in frugality so my children wouldn't have to. I never told them. I never had to. I thought they sensed it. Back then, I was the backbone, dropping off lunches, banking interest, walking Daniel to school when the car broke. I was proud, and I thought they were grateful. They were not. Over time, the tone changed. Teachers complimented my dedication. Doctors appreciated my calm. Friends called me remarkable, but my children began to avoid my calls. Grandma's house had become a museum, my cooking dated, and my wardrobe, most of all my wardrobe, a running joke. I didn't mind the changing styles. Fashion passes, but I minded what it told me, that I no longer belonged. That none of the promises I had made or nurtured still mattered. That Sunday, hearing those cruel jokes about my dress, the hollow echo of someone mocking the person who once believed in you, it broke something inside me. And in the shattered pieces, I found a clarity I had been missing. That night, I returned home alone. The house felt quieter than usual. The photographs on the wall seemed to look at me with pity. I sat at the dining table and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside was the folder containing every deed, every certificate, every ledger I had accumulated. I spread them out. One by one, the farmland deed, the insurance book, the CDs, they were all in my name. I leaned back and traced the ink that read Donna L. Adams, 60 years of gathering and preserving, built on frugality, devotion, love. And for whom? Nobody asked me what I wanted at any point. Nobody asked me in my widowhood what comfort I might need. Instead, they laughed, as if I were a distorted relic from some older time. They made a joke out of my dignity. They never asked what I wanted, not once. I closed the folder. I walked to the living room mirror and put my hand on the olive dress hanging behind me. It looked faded by the hallway light, but it still held the echo of that proud moment. That moment when my son acknowledged me in front of the world. I took a deep breath, wrapped my fingers around the dress fabric, and pulled it close to my chest. I thought of that promise. I will always be the person you are most grateful for. Then I thought, no, I refuse to be the blueprint for a legacy of convenience, not love. I slipped the olive dress into the drawer beside the folder, locking it away. And in the safe, I walked over, opened the combination, and gently retrieved every deed that had been there for decades. I looked at those pages and didn't feel anger. I felt resolution. That night, I made my decision. I would preserve my legacy, but not for people who traded their love for a laugh. At dawn, I would speak to my lawyer. I would take their disbelief and their disdain and turn it into something that gave foundation again, but this time not to the people who called me a cocoon, to people who needed shelter, stability, respect. I closed the safe and locked it. I turned off the light and waited for the morning. I arrived at Martin and Green law offices just after 9 the next morning. The building felt more familiar than many rooms in my own house. I had once escorted a class of high school juniors through mock trials here when I was their English teacher. And there, behind the reception desk, stood Leah Martin, now a lawyer, once a student I'd praised for her sharp analysis and respectful demeanor. She greeted me with a warm but surprised smile. "Mrs. Adams," she said, "this is a surprise. What brings you in so early?" I returned the smile. "Leah, I need your help to fix something I should have fixed years ago." She led me into a small conference room with a polished oak table. Fresh coffee steamed from a carafe in the corner. She placed a notepad, pen, and legal pads in front of me. I took a seat and set down my purse. my folded dress, and the folder containing my will and deeds. "I have documents," I said quietly. "But first, I want to tell you what those people said." I recounted Sunday's humiliation, the mocking laughter, the cruel words about my dress, a twisted cocoon, an old curtain, a cosplaying relic. As I spoke, Leia's face tightened, as though each insult landed with weight. When I finished, she closed her eyes a moment, then looked at me firmly. "I'm sorry you went through that," she said. "You deserve better, and I suspect you came to a decision." I nodded. I pulled out a printed copy of my previous will and contracts. I unfolded the document and laid it flat. This was drafted 5 years ago, with everything in my name and 2 trustees I trusted, my son and daughter-in-law. They are the sole beneficiaries. But things have changed. I paused. What I am about to ask won't be simple. Leah flipped open her legal pad. "Tell me what you want." I explained calmly. I wanted to remove all family members, my son, daughter-in-law, and grandchildren, completely from any inheritance. I wanted the beach house, the farmland, the savings, all of it, to go to a non-profit foundation that teaches sewing, weaving, and financial skills to women over 50 who have been through domestic violence or abandonment. I wanted to reserve a small portion, enough to buy a 1-bedroom cottage near school, so I could continue teaching, tutoring, living modestly but with purpose. She nodded thoughtfully. "It's a powerful move. Are you absolutely certain?" I looked up at her. "I am." We spent the next 90 minutes drafting the new will, each clause carefully worded, each beneficiary replaced, each piece of property reallocated. My signature line appeared at the bottom of every page, Donna L. Adams. When we reached the trustees section, I named 3 women from a nearby women's charity, only one of whom I retained personal contact with. No blood relatives included. Leah explained the logistics. 2 witnesses, notarization, then record the document with the county clerk. "You'll need to destroy the old copy," she said. "Otherwise someone could challenge it." We did all of that. I signed, I sealed the envelope. I watched Leah make copies, notarize, and prepare the documents for filing. When it was over, I felt something I hadn't felt in months, and I stared at my hands. Lightness. Not pleasure. Not vengeance. Just clarity. Leah closed her case file. "You did what you set out to do," she observed gently. "Yes," I said, "I did." She leaned forward. "You okay?" I paused, considering. I've never been more okay. On the drive back through the quiet streets of Iowa, I watched the golden fields through the window, unchanged, yet filled with promise. I thought of standing before the camera that day, of being laughed at and ignored, of that moment of walking away. Now, I was building towards something I believed in again. That evening, I sat at my dining table surrounded by the same documents. I poured myself a cup of tea and read through the will one more time. The beneficiaries section listed Threads of Dignity Foundation, followed by Donna L. Adams Personal Fund, 1-bedroom cottage near town. Nothing else. No names, no apologies. I folded the paper carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. I locked it in the safe next to the deed. I turned the lock and let out the breath I had been holding. That night, as I drifted to sleep, I realized that I had found another definition of family, one founded on gratitude, respect, healing. This legacy was mine, again. I saw the first sign of trouble that afternoon when my son called, not with warmth in his voice, but with the clipped tone of someone exercising a right, not begging for a favor. His words tumbled out sharp against the quiet hum of my kitchen. "Mom, I need to talk to you. This isn't right. I was planning on using the beach house as collateral for our investment fund. We even had a meeting with my partner." He paused. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" I felt the cup slip between my fingers, but I didn't drop it. I set it on the table. My voice was steady. "Daniel, I have made my choice." I waited, though the line was silent. Then I added, "Yes, I'm certain." The call ended without warmth. That evening, I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find both Daniel and Rachel standing on the step. They looked exhausted, like they had run miles they didn't want to run. Daniel spoke first. "Mom, this is crazy. We're family. I thought you'd trust me to manage it." His eyes flicked to the folder I held, thin but clearly marked with letters from my own handwriting. Rachel stepped forward, arms crossed. "We just want an explanation. Is this really what you want? To leave us with nothing? I nodded. Yes, you have everything you need. The house, the savings, they are yours to use now. I only want to ensure they go somewhere that still values what I built. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Someplace that values what you built, like a business you funded yourself. He glanced at Rachel. Are you okay with Mom saying we don't value her? Her expression wavered, but she remained silent. We sat around the kitchen table. I slid the photograph across to them, a still from that church basement photo shoot. There I stood in my olive dress, the laughter frozen around me. Is this the face you see when you think of me? I asked softly. Rachel turned away. Daniel swallowed hard. I cleared my throat, then slid the picture toward the center. That was not a costume party. That was betrayal. My body, my dignity, my history, subjected to laughter. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I inhaled, steadying my voice. I'm not asking you to beg. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to offer clarity. Daniel's face drained. Mom, please. This inheritance is meant to support our future. I nodded again. And that would be fine if the foundation of that future wasn't built on erasing one person. I pulled the documents from the folder, copy of the new will, asset deeds. I placed each on the table. Look, everything is legal, everything is final. I kept my tone quiet, calm, measured. Not one paper remains in your names. The house has already transferred to the Threads of Dignity Foundation. All savings, too. Daniel's jaw dropped. But you can't do that. I looked at him, the son who once wrapped himself in a scarf I knitted, the boy I read bedtime stories to. But next to that memory was the faded echo of his stone-hearted indifference. I said, I already did. Rachel's voice cracked. She said, you destroyed this family. I leaned forward. No, I dismantled the lie. You laughed at me in front of cameras, sent those pictures to group chat. You never once asked what I wanted. You just assumed I'd be there. Daniel shook his head. You don't get it. This was supposed to be our legacy. My hand floated above the photo. I picked it up and read aloud, slowly. Grandma cosplay curtain. That was not a joke. That was your statement to me and to yourselves. Tears glistened in his eyes. I continued, my legacy doesn't belong to those who mock its keeper. He closed his mouth and exhaled. Rachel whispered, what do you want then? I folded my hands over mine. I want dignity. I want my life to matter to someone. Then I paused. If it's too much to ask of you, I'll offer it elsewhere. I stood, leaving the silent weight of my words in the air. I walked toward the door. Even as the sun dipped low, the house felt cooler, no longer mine. Before I closed it, I said, think about the laughter you recorded and the woman you decided was a joke. That's all I ever asked you to remember. They didn't respond. The door shut. It echoed behind me. I walked down the path, feeling less empty than I had in years, because some things, like legacy and self-respect, are better reclaimed than forgotten. I answered the door to find Rachel standing on the porch, mascara tracks still wet on her cheeks, and her expression a mixture of pleading and heartbreak. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Mom, she began, in a small voice that was nothing like the confident tone she wore at the photo shoot. We were just joking. We didn't mean to hurt you. Didn't you ever feel a little sad? Her voice cracked mid-sentence, and tears trembled on her lash. I nodded and gestured toward the dining table. Let's talk. She moved slowly, each step one burdened apology, and sat across from me. The kitchen clock ticked softly in the background. She folded and unfolded her hands. It was just a stupid remark. Everybody says dumb things. We didn't expect you to leave it all. I remained quiet, letting her words settle in the heavy air. Rachel shifted in her seat. Would an apology be enough? I mean, I am sorry. We're sorry, right, Daniel? Her voice rose as my son entered, shoulders slumped, eyes full of guilt. He nodded. Rachel looked up at me with wet eyes and pleaded, we're sorry. Does that help? I slid the folder over to her. Inside were printed screenshots, private text messages between her and my son from earlier that day. I placed them on the table. They saw the messages, she needs to go, and let's just cut her out, quietly. Lines of laughter emojis at my expense. The weight of their words lay spread out in black and white. Rachel picked up a page with trembling fingers and traced the lines. I didn't think you'd actually see them. I spoke softly. Because you assumed I wouldn't matter enough to look. But you did. It was all caught up in that moment. The childish gatherings, hidden mockery, and the facade of affection they insisted was enough. She swallowed. Mom, please, we love you. I clasped my hands on the table and leaned forward. Love isn't declared with words when all you do is erase someone's dignity with your actions. Love doesn't hide behind an olive dress and a forced smile. The room felt colder, harsher. I preserved this legacy for you, thinking it meant something. But it wasn't enough. I took a breath and looked directly at her. If apologies could rebuild what was broken, I would still have left everything to you. I said the words slowly, like a mantra. But love isn't built on what is left. It's how you stand when what's taken away is all that's left. You could have heard a pin drop. Daniel's eyes strayed to the stack of documents beside me, and I sensed the shifting weight in the room. I reached for the folder again. This time I pulled out the trust document, my final will, and laid them on the table. I have removed your names entirely, I said. You will receive nothing, not the house, not the savings, not the land. Rachel's mouth fell open. Daniel leaned forward in shock. He looked as though someone had pulled the floor from under him. Every penny is going to the Threads of Dignity Foundation, I said firmly, a place where I can teach women to weave and sew and piece their lives back together, a place where they know I care, because it never came from a lunchbox. It came from a lifetime of intention. Rachel swallowed. But we're family. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, family isn't claimed with DNA. Family is earned every day. Do you understand? Their heads nodded, but not fully. No apology could erase that sting. You mocked me. You shared jokes that spread like wildfire. You treated me like a costume, not a person. And for you, that was easier to laugh at than to resist. Tears welled in Rachel's eyes as she reached toward the papers. Mom, please. Could we still find compromise? I lifted a finger and gently closed her hand. No. Compromise comes before the hurt. Now, there is clarity. I slid the documents back toward myself. Everything is legal, everything is recorded. I have signed it, I have filed it, I have released it. Daniel's voice broke. But how can you just... He looked at the papers, at me. It doesn't feel right. I shifted, letting the finality settle. Right is what is true. I can no longer live with false affection. Rachel looked between her husband and me, tears tracking down her face. She whispered, we didn't realize it meant that much. I pressed my palm against the cool wood of the table. Those whispers and giggles, they meant everything. And they broke more than my heart. Her shoulders slumped. She searched for words, but none came. I closed my eyes and breathed in. I hope one day you'll realize what dignity looks like, from the outside in. I stood then, gathering my folder. I'm done explaining. They rose as I did. Rachel backed away toward the door with slow steps. Daniel remained between us, but I did not look at him. I left the room without another word. The door shut behind me. In the silent kitchen, the papers lay face up. I inhaled, relief settling over me like a bomb. They had tried to negotiate with shattered bones. But I had already found new strength in something better, unconditional purpose, unyielding integrity. Their inheritance was gone, but they could keep their memories. I would build from here. I moved to a small farmhouse west of town 2 weeks after the will was recorded. The fields stretched wide under an open Iowa sky, and the house's white siding greeted me like a fresh page. I painted the porch trim sage green and planted lavender along the walkway. I hung strings of lanterns that glowed soft amber at night. I spent days painting walls and sorting cabinets, but the moment I nailed the Hooks for Heritage sign above the front door, hand-lettered in soft brown and gold, it felt like the house took its first breath. I decided the new space would become my workshop and a small center for women like me, women who had weathered storms smaller people couldn't see. With grant money from my old teachers' union and a donation from a neighbor who remembered me lining up essays as a teacher, I bought the equipment: a sturdy oak loom, a supply of threads, embroidery hoops, sewing machines with flatbeds. I stacked jars of threads in every color imaginable, neatly labeled. I filled boxes with scrap fabric from estate sales, florals, solids, remnant odds and ends, all the colors that once colored my life. On opening day, spring equinox, I stood on the porch and looked at the group gathered. 6 women, mostly in their 60s and 70s, each face lined with loss and resilience. One trembling, elderly lady carried a wicker basket filled with flowers, her hands shaking as she set it on a table. Another had brushed her gray hair straight back and held a manila envelope. You could tell it held something precious, maybe a story. A third woman wore mismatched socks and layered sweaters, like she dressed herself in bursts of rebellion. I welcomed each of them by name. Dorothy, May, Linda, Grace, Eleanor. I handed them cups of mint tea and a slice of lemon cake, keeping it gentle, healing. I led them into the workshop. I introduced the structure. This is not about being perfect, it is about doing. One stitch at a time, we can mend more than fabric. My eyes carried across them. In the background, on the wall, the olive green dress hung beneath the Hooks for Heritage sign, a silent testament. They noticed its presence. No one pointed or laughed. Instead, I saw heads lower in recognition, something like empathy. For 6 weeks, we wove and stitched together. We shared our stories of losing husbands, separation from children, losing homes, losing purpose. We learned from each other. Grace showed how to finger embroider wildflowers. Dorothy revealed how she spun yarn from wool she'd saved for decades. Linda, a former seamstress, taught basic pattern making. Each creation carried secret love inside its folds. One morning, right after a workshop, May approached me in the sunlit doorway. She held my hand and pressed her forehead to my chest. "Donna, I don't even have a daughter," she said, her voice quavering. "My family left me long ago. But here, with you, someone actually looked me in the eye and called me bright. You called me kind." She paused and squeezed my fingers. Then she whispered, "For the first time in my life, I was called a decent person. Because of her." Her words landed softly in the room, but they echoed through my chest. I touched her back gently and whispered, "You are so very kind, May." Time passed, and Hooks for Heritage grew. We hosted patchwork circles, quilting bees, and open studio retreats. The olive dress remained on the wall, framed by the golden letters and strings of lantern light. Occasionally, I would walk by and touch the fabric, remembering that moment of cruelty and how it changed everything. In May, I invited the town mayor and the women's shelter director for a small ribbon-cutting ceremony. We raised $50,000, 0 cents in donations that day, and opened a scholarship fund. A local news reporter took pictures of the loom, the smiling women, and the dress hanging in solidarity. Later, I pulled the reporter aside and said, "It's more than a workshop. It's a declaration that we all deserve dignity, even if we don't fit someone else's idea of worth." Late one afternoon, as the sun dipped low, I sat at a workbench tying sample threads when Linda, the seamstress, slid a cup of tea across to me. She said softly, "I used to teach in a factory. I thought I'd have nothing to show after retirement. Now, look around." She gestured to the women working, patching tears, choosing colors, smiling. This is what matters." I nodded and swept my gaze to the dress. "We're making something beautiful out of scraps," she smiled. In the soft glow of lantern light, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in decades. No longer a walking relic, no longer a punchline, but a founder, a teacher, a mother, to women who needed someone to stitch them back together. I rose and walked to the wall. I touched the olive green fabric, following threads with my fingertips. I whispered. They laughed, but I rewove what they lost. And in that place, we all rewove something larger than a dress or even a legacy. We rewove respect, belonging, and the quiet power of one stitch made with purpose. I began receiving letters not long after our first quilt-making circle ended at Hooks for Heritage. They came in plain envelopes, sometimes with flowers tucked inside, sometimes with childlike drawings that broke my heart open. I could feel their trembling hands and hopeful hearts even before I opened them. The first one arrived on a rainy afternoon. I was in the workshop threading bobbins when I heard the postman's knock. I waited until the storm rattled our covered porch before I opened the envelope. Inside was a note in cursive. "Dear Mrs. Adams, I do not know how to say thank you. I am 74 and have never been called kind, let alone shown how to be. You welcomed me, a stranger, into your home, and for the first time in decades, I felt like a person who belonged. The violet quilt we stitched, It warmed me, even after I closed the door at night. May you always know you gave more than threads and needles, you gave hope. Sincerely, Joan. I stood in the soft lamplight of the sewing room and let the words sink in. Joan, 78 years old, lost after her husband left her for a younger woman, children drifting away like leaves on the wind. That violet quilt was what she brought. I didn't price it, I let her keep it. Now it was hers to cherish. That same weekly drop brought another letter, a few days later, a brown paper envelope with gold edges, from May, the woman who first hugged me in tears. Her letter read, "Dear Donna, I have 3 daughters who live miles away and speak only of grandchildren I never see. But here, in your workshop, I offered my quilt top with trembling hands. Yesterday I watched as a mother and child chose it for a raffle, and both thanked me for helping decorate their home with love. It felt like my hands did something again. Thank you for giving them that moment. With deep gratitude, May." I folded the letter carefully and placed it in a vase next to a framed photograph of our first gathering, a blurry but luminous moment. It showed 6 women gathered around my oak loom, Maria's mustard yellow quilt tucked behind her shoulder like a banner. I stared at that photo often, especially on mornings when I doubted the choice to erase my family's names from my will. By summer, the stack of letters had grown. There was one from Dorothy, who'd lost her sight gradually over the years, yet still managed to weave stitches of color into a baby blanket. She wrote, "Dear Donna, I couldn't see the blues or greens, but I felt each stitch as a whisper of purpose. I haven't done anything this kind since my husband died. I leave the baby blanket on the table each night before I go to sleep. It reminds me that I can still create, still care. Thank you for reminding me who I am. In friendship, Dorothy." I began reading these letters aloud at the Friday sewing circles, discreetly, before we all began stitching. The women listened, nodding, recognizing themselves in the stories. "You see," I'd say, "my legacy isn't brick, it's kindness." They smiled and reached out to tuck threads into their fabric. One day the local paper did a feature on us. They called us Sunday Stitchers and highlighted the workshop as a model of intergenerational healing. They printed my picture next to my olive dress hanging behind me. The headline read, "Old Dress, New Dignity, Iowa Grandma's Threads of Worth." A twist I appreciated. Joan's envelope came next with a newspaper clipping of that article. Inside she wrote, "Dear Mrs. Adams." I clipped this and showed it to my grandson, who finally listened to me. He said, "Grandma, that's your dress. You made that place." And for the first time I felt his respect. Thank you for making that same change in me. I pressed the clipping into my journal, tears filling my eyes. In that moment I realized something. The inheritance I had bequeathed was not empty. It was living, evolving, nurturing. The final letter of the season arrived just yesterday. It was from Linda, the former factory seamstress. "Dear Donna, we held a public quilting show yesterday. The room was full, young families, old neighbors, volunteers. When I introduced you as our founder, the applause shook the walls. Never have I felt such pride. And afterward, several women came up to me and said, 'That woman is someone. Thank you for being someone again. Always, Linda.'" I folded that letter and walked to the wall where my olive dress hung, and the Hooks for Heritage sign glowed softly. I pressed my hand against the fabric and whispered, "I am someone." My voice cracked, but certain. I no longer cared about being a relic or a costume. I had reclaimed my worth with each stitch and each signature. My legacy was no longer tied to the approval of the ones who laughed. It had been woven into the lives of women who understood that dignity is not what you wear, but what you give. Late that evening, I lit the lantern by the loom and sat down with a fresh sheet of parchment. I began drafting letters to each organization that had reached out for help. Knitting guilds, senior centers, libraries. My ministry would grow. The olive dress would stay on the wall until they tore the house down. I tucked my journal under the loom and closed the workshop door. As I walked home through the silent fields, I looked up at the stars. I thought of each woman whose life had quietly changed because someone taught them to stitch, to create, to belong. And I smiled because I had not become a relic. I had become a beginning. That night, I fell asleep with the words of May echoing in my mind. For the first time in my life, I was called kind because of you, and I knew I had rewritten not just inheritance papers, but what legacy truly means. I remember the morning as though the sun paused just for me. I had brewed chamomile tea before dawn, filled my kettle, and set it on the stove while the sky painted itself with soft pinks. The workshop at Hooks for Heritage lay silent behind me, the olive green dress still hanging on the wall like a quiet ambassador of purpose. I stepped out onto the porch with my steaming cup and paused by the lavender, fresh buds unfurling, and whispered to the air, "Here we go again." A young woman, Jenna, came by the fence carrying a basket of freshly picked daisies. She had been coming every Tuesday since summer, learning embroidery and listening to stories. We sat on wicker chairs. "Mrs. Adams," she said, voice gentle like a breeze. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course, dear." She tilted her head toward the dress hanging behind me inside the workshop. "Why keep it there?" I glanced over at it. It looked faded under the sun, its once bright green, now a comforting sage. I smiled. "The dress didn't change, Jenna. If anything, changed it was how people saw it." She paused. I continued. "That day, when they laughed at me, my dress became more than fabric. It became a vocabulary, mockery, disrespect. But I chose to reclaim the story." Jenna nodded, thinking. I took another sip. "I taught women here to stitch, to weave patches together. And I stitched my dignity back one thread at a time. I rewove what they tore apart." She let her eyes rest on the dress. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "And it's yours." "Yes," I said. "It always was." The sun climbed higher and its fingers touched the porch. I set the cup down, feeling the warmth on my palm. Behind me the garden stirred, orange marigolds nodding, basil releasing its sweet scent. I closed my eyes, remembering the sound of laughter in that basement photo shoot. I remembered my feet walking away, the cold air like truth against my skin. I remembered opening that drawer, hanging the dress, opening the safe, speaking with lawyers, building this place. It all led to now. "Every morning," I said to Jenna, "I make tea, I water the lavender and basil, and I think of that moment, how fragile dignity can be, and how easy it is to lose it in a single cruel word. But I also remember what came after, how we rebuilt ourselves, how this place came to life, how respect can grow where laughter lies." Jenna looked at me with gentle pride. I leaned forward. "They laughed at my dress," I said softly, "but I wove something more valuable than thread. I wove back respect. And now this place, these women, these flowers, they remind me every day that dignity is not given, it's made. It's stitched with purpose." A breeze drifted through the yard, carrying petals and whispered light. I watched Jenna put a single daisy behind her ear, then lean forward to tie the ribbon basket around her waist and head into the workshop where the women were already stitching, threads weaving over patterns of survival, rebirth, community. I took one last look at the dress. Then I turned back toward my little cottage and walked in, the floorboards creaking under purpose. I left the door open. In the quiet that settled behind me, the workshop's lanterns glowed brighter, threads wove together, and an old dress hung on the wall, no longer the butt of a joke, but a quiet testament, a legacy rewove, not by who I once was, but by what we created together. I poured another cup of tea and stepped to the window, watching sunlight dance across the lavender outside. Because sometimes the greatest legacy is not what you took away, but what you wove afterwards. They laughed at my dress, but I rewrote what they lost, with threads of dignity and a pattern of purpose that will last long after the fabric fades. If this story touched something quiet in you, if you've ever walked away from a room where you were laughed at, only to build something stronger with your own two hands, then you're not alone. And you never were. Here at Grandma, true stories, we tell what others bury. We speak softly, but we carry truth. And every thread in these stories is real, stitched from memory, silence, and the strength it takes to stand up after they've tried to fold you away. Subscribe to this channel if you believe respect is not inherited, it's earned. Like this video if you've ever been underestimated, and share this story with someone who needs to remember. Legacy is not what they give you, it's what you choose to leave behind. I'm Grandma, and I'll be here, waiting to tell the next true story.